You forgot the first rule of remakes, Jill. Don't fuck with the original.
Hi everyone, Iron Man 3 is coming out next week, so it's time for another edition of Don't F with the Original. I am Dimitri, editor-in-chief of Idiomatic.com and movie critic. Nick couldn't make it, so sitting with me are Chris, Eric, and Frank from the Dreamer's Edge podcast.
On to Iron Man. Iron Man, which, in my opinion, is the classic Stalinist propaganda movie. An unusually frank meditation on the harsh reality of life in the Soviet Politburo during the post-war years. Tony Stark has a problem. He's got sports cars, he's got women, he's got power. And he makes a buck every time somebody shoots someone, particularly soldiers or terrorists. But now he's in Afghanistan, showcasing his latest missile. And he finally ends up getting kidnapped by terrorists. Oh God, he wakes up with a metal plate on his chest and shrapnel going to his heart. What's he gonna do? Well, he's gonna make friends with the other captive, Dr. Yin Yan, I believe.
I don't remember the name.
Are we gonna do a play-by-play? Come on, move this thing along.
Okay, fine. He gets a great idea. I'm gonna escape by building a giant metal suit. An idea so awesome that has thrilled comic book lovers for decades. So he builds this metal suit, kills the terrorist, flees off to America, where he builds a better suit of armor and fights for justice. Unfortunately...
Hey, Frank, do you want to mention as well who appears second in the credits while you're at it?
I was just getting to that.
What happens in...
Unfortunately for him, Jeff Bridges is waiting in the wings.
Oh.
Isn't that...
It's so detailed. It's so ridiculously detailed.
I was just going to leave it at that.
Oh, man, that's really
so
funny.
Iron Man. Marvel's probably, in my opinion, best outing in years. After Spider-Man 2, certainly the best one. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I agree. The new one's going to be opening up next week. So I revisited Iron Man. It's been a while. Loved it when I saw it in the theater. Wasn't really sure if I'd like it again on DVD. And in the end, it's a slick piece of merchandise, pretty much like the Iron Man armor. I want one. It's got the polish, it's got the guns, it's got the explosions, and it's pretty much everything you want a tentpole popcorn movie to be for the summer.
I agree with you, except I think it's more than a popcorn movie. I think there's a bit of political comment in there, and I think there's a real hero in there. I think the message of the whole movie is, well, obviously it's about Iron Man taking responsibility for being an arms dealer and all of that, but if you take the Tony Stark character as being the quintessential American, the whole idea is that you can be responsible without being anti-American.
Speaking of, sorry, Dimitri, I'm just to cut in for a second. Certainly there's a really heavy-handed approach. You've got the rich industrialist. He's got everything given to him. He's a genius, and he's bored. So he's looking for the next thing to challenge himself. But basically along the way, he discovers that he's got the conscience. He loses a heart to gain a heart. He's the Wizard of Oz's Tin Man, creates his own piece of armor and goes out to save the world. But the first time he actually wears the armor and goes in and destroys some of his own, day job weapons of mass destruction that have fallen into the hands of terrorists. He flies into the area. First time he tests out the Iron Man armor in a live scenario like this. And he basically wipes everyone out except for the leader of the terrorist group, and he throws them to the people.
Yeah.
And this is kind of, when you're talking about the parallel right now with the Americans, who kind of swoop in, and they've been trying to get out of that area of the world for quite some time. And, but they do that by they're trying to set up, legitimate democratic governments, or, at least semblance of, something that can govern itself, and here he basically just drops it into the mob rule and takes off.
Yes, but you have to remember, that's how America was made, Chris.
So it's, in terms of, political, hindsight, you know what I mean? It's really crass, I find.
But, I think I misspoke when I said political. I think there's some political overtones, but I don't think it's commenting on Iraq or Afghanistan in any way, you know what I mean? But I think it's commenting on the idea that of Americans' relationship to America. is what it is. It's sort of like, just because you're pro-American rah 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 doesn't mean you get to bulldoze everything around you, and like that's on a personal level, not on a political level. You know, like you don't get to go like, the Canadians have healthcare. They're forcing cesareans on women and killing the elderly. Like, you know, and at the same time, you don't have to be ashamed of, you know, being a cheeseburger loving or Burger King Whopper loving citizen of America. You know what I mean? And I think the movie goes a long way to do that. It doesn't have that sort of emo poetry that The Dark Knight has.
I was going to say, if you bookend this against something like The Dark Knight, it's such a bright movie.
Yeah,
and it's light, and you know, and
Yellow and red.
and that's what I enjoyed about it. You know, you've got the California sun, you've got this sense when he puts the armor on the first time, he's like, just that line of like, oh yeah, I can fly. And it's just like, that's what everyone wants. It's freaking cool.
Well, the big, I think a big kudos goes to Robert Downey Jr., who really approached the role in a specific goofy way. I have liked Iron Man for a long time. I've read the comic as a kid, and I was a big fan. And I have to say, Robert Downey Jr. really, you know, as Tony Stark, makes you feel he's the cool exec with the heart of steel, you know?
Yeah.
As Iron Man, all jets ablaze, he fights and smites with repulsor rays.
But it's funny because Jon Favreau, who directed it, you know, it reminded me that he and Vince Vaughn were in The Swingers together, and I'd almost have loved to have seen Vince Vaughn as Tony Stark. I don't know why.
Yeah, I don't know.
No, it's sort of because Robert Downey Jr. does it so well that I can't imagine anybody else.
Yeah.
That's right, yeah.
But for me, I really liked it. And the thing is, I never liked Iron Man before. I always thought he was probably one of the most boring superheroes. I'm like, well, just has an armor. But seeing the movie, and then the way that you see him constantly working. He's always kind of fixing up the armor. He's there like in his garage and constantly building himself. And I thought that was pretty interesting. Like, you don't see a lot of movies with superheroes where you see them work. That's all they do.
Well,
They get their power, and this guy, he's really self-made.
Well, except for The Dark Knight or Batman.
that's
Yeah.
the thing, right?
So
Like,
there really is. They're both rich people, and they're kind of building their, you know, utility belt, so to speak.
there are two types of superheroes. There's the sort of the technological superhero, and then there's the superhero who has quote unquote natural born powers, whether it's mutants or being bitten by a radioactive spider or you know, being in the sun of Krypton. But as a kid, one of the things that attracted me about Iron Man is that of all the superheroes you can imagine yourself being when you're 10 years old, you know, it'd be great to be Spider-Man and climb walls, but, you know, there aren't that many, you know, radioactive spiders lying around. And, well, I don't come from Krypton, so, you know, forget about, you know, like,
Yeah, I didn't
Superman.
see you there.
But you know what? Being Iron Man, anybody can be Iron Man, right? All you need is the suit. Now, of course, I don't have the technological genius to build the suit, but I always found it interesting that, in a sense, really, it's almost the most accessible of fantasies, right? And Iron Man was very much like that. He had all these technological marvels all over him, much like Batman, but, you know, in a even more like, you know, this guy was bulletproof. This guy could, like, have, like, you know, all sorts of rays and whatever. And, you know, when they started coming out with the specific armors in the 80s, that was really awesome. But going back to the choice of Robert Downey Jr., the substance abuse problem, I think, is what made Iron Man particularly interesting to me. Not because I was an alcoholic in the 1980s, but because I felt that Iron Man, Tony Stark, had an interesting fight with himself that a lot of other superheroes did not. You know, this is a guy who had to deal with success and, to a certain extent, deal with alcoholism, you know, and you know, he had an inner demon that he had to fight constantly. There's a reality to alcoholism that is far different from the reality of Bruce Banner turning into the Hulk, or a number of other, I guess, situations.
That's one of the more popular storylines from, I think, the 80s to the 90s.
Absolutely.
The Demon in the Bottle storyline.
Yeah.
And it's not something they really touch on in the first Iron Man movie.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because it's actually the story that I find destroyed Iron Man in
Really?
the comics. Yeah, it's a good story, but it's a story that left the hero with very little place to go afterwards. And it's also a story that I always found went against the character, because, like, you touch on the origin story a little bit, and it's my favorite superhero origin story. Because here you have a man who has a God-given heart, and it sucks. Like, it's a weak heart that gets injured, and he might die from it. And also, like, if you take the metaphor aspect of it, you know, he's a bad man. He's an arms dealer, and he's a pretty selfish one at that. He's a pretty irresponsible man. And it's only when he rebuilds his own heart, where he rejects the heart that nature gave him and remade himself a new man, that this heart that he created for himself powers his heroism, kind of deal. And it was always for me, the idea is that if you have that thing where he has the quote-unquote alcoholic gene, well, then the whole idea of him rebuilding himself out of sheer will is just lost, because his nature has just taken over. You know what I mean?
Oh,
his conversion, in my mind, is really... I mean, he rebuilds his heart to a certain extent, but it's also the sacrifice of his fellow captive who helps him build the armor, but is ultimately killed. And they really played that up in the movie, and I really like that moment where the guy looks at him and says, he exacts the promise from Tony Stark, live a worthwhile life, and he dies. And that, in a sense, becomes Tony Stark's mission. He converts right then and there. He's gone through a traumatic experience, and he comes out of there a changed and different man. But that doesn't necessarily mean that his old ghosts and all his success, and to a certain extent, you know, the blood he's got on his hands, which will never wash off, you know, as an arms dealer, all of this continues to haunt him.
I agree with that, but that's the idea. He decides, like, what makes Iron Man stand out is that he's not a hero that's born out of trauma. He's a hero that's born out of realization. It's sort of my favorite aspect of this movie. It's sort of like the first adult superhero in movies that we've seen, you know?
It's true, but you see him in the movie, and even though he comes to this realization, he's a success, but he's not a successful man. He's basically alone. All he's got is his administrative assistant, for whom, you know, he's got feelings, maybe just because she's the only constant in his life, but he's basically isolated. Mm-hmm. You know, he keeps everyone at a distance, and he's got this, you know, smarmy attitude, you know, just to kind of keep people off and on edge, you know? And I think he doesn't change that side of his personality necessarily.
By starting this little discussion, I'm steering away from the movie, but the thing with the alcoholism is so attached, and especially the way it was treated in the comic, is so attached to the whole idea of, like, well, you know, alcoholics have the gene, you know what I mean? And I found it that goes against, like, if Tony Stark should be haunted by his decisions, not by his nature. If you know what I mean. Like, I think that's the side of Iron Man that works. Like, that's why Matt Fraction's run works, because it's him trying to make up for his bad decisions in the past, not his nature.
No, I agree. And but it's kind of funny, you were talking about the man that helps him build his armor, and I thought that relationship, that friendship that grows, is pretty interesting. And it's the way working, none of them are talking about anything, and then it's Tony, all of a sudden he's playing backgammon, and he's like, so where are you from? And he starts opening up and listening to him, and you can tell, like, he's... I thought that was an interesting friendship, like, the way it built, just around that, and you could see this guy is, like, a working machine. Like, that's what he does. He works, and doesn't really think of other people. But then he had a good assistant, so he could bond with him.
Well, that whole scene, too, when he finally puts that, you know, rudimentary armor on for the first time, it's... so much like a knight putting on the armor with his page. You know?
Yeah, it's true.
It's kind of interesting, you know, just you know, some of the details, and, you know, the goiter around the neck and everything. It's just.
But speaking of the armor, though, like, the one thing, if I have a problem with the movie, it's the ending. Like, the fight, the big fight scene at the end. I was like, eh.
I agree with that.
How would you have ended it, though?
Well,
you know, it's.
I think they should have broke into a song and started tap dancing.
Don't rain on my parade. You see, the thing with Iron Man is that I think, even though I coming in at it from a fan, outside of the storyline they showed, which I knew they were going to go with Stain, and I knew they were going to go with Ironmonger, because in a sense, in terms of battle, that's really the biggest, I guess, one of the biggest moments in Iron Man. Iron Man, oddly enough, has always lacked a lot of very interesting villains, I found. Aside from Titanium Man and Crimson Dynamo, like those that can really go toe to toe, and it's really communist. Like it's really it has that whole feel too.
That's the thing is Iron Man's rogue gallery is not very good because it's pretty much the most racist one in the Marvel universe.
Well, it's also
Yeah,
like
it's
I
true.
guess it's the most inept. I mean,
Who's
The Mandarin.
the Mandarin? I was
Oh,
gonna,
yeah.
with the rings, you know, like it's
well, it's very 60s Cold War, right? Okay, so what did you worry about? You worried about the Russians and you worried about the Chinese. So who are his big enemies? And the guy is like, he's a weapons contractor, right? Stanley originally wrote the character as sort of like, okay, I'm going to make this guy an arms deal, which is like one of the one type of person that is so despised by people, but I'm going to turn him into a comic book hero and I'm going to force people to love him, right? And then with the Vietnam War uneasiness, the character evolved into one that was more like, okay, he's starting to think about what he's doing in the world. And, there's a storyline called the Armor Wars in the 1980s, which is really interesting because Tony Stark actively starts hunting down. He does a bit like what he does in the movie, which is he starts hunting down elements of his own technology, which has been used not only by governments, but by superheroes and supervillains.
Just a side thing. It's actually the 90s, not the 80s.
Oh, 90s, sorry. Yeah, that's right.
I do want to get back on what Eric said about the final fight, though, because I agree with you, Eric, that it was a little bit underwhelming.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything wrong with it ending with a fight. If it's an action movie, let's have a big fight. But I think it sort of shows that Jon Favreau is a very gifted director when it comes to creating a character. I think Iron Man comes off as such a lively, three-dimensional character without real D glasses.
Yeah.
And but he's not an action director just yet. You know what I mean? It was sort of it was very workman-like in terms of directing. There was no ooh, ah moment during the fight.
And it's kind of funny because when I remember hearing that it was going to be him that was going to direct, I was like, really? Favreau?
I was so excited.
But I thought it was going to be bad. Then I saw it and no, completely opposite. I really enjoyed it. And it's kind of funny. I watched it not too long ago and I watched, firstly, like Superman Returns. Then I watched Iron Man and Superman had symphonies and everything. And then Iron Man is all about rock and roll. Like the minute it starts, you have AC/DC, they're rolling and you can tell he's in the Jeep kind of bored and then he's making small talk and he comes off as very charming and funny.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, speaking of that, his relationship with Pepper Potts, I want to throw in there. It felt like one of those old movies, old 50s movies that the repartee was really those old romantic comedies where the dialogue was really snappy and really fast, and
it's kind of
loved
funny
it.
because the first time I saw it, I thought Gwyneth Paltrow was not very good. I don't know why. And then I watched it again. I'm like, what is wrong with me? She's actually really good. She, she gives it back to him every time, and I was like, wow.
as much as
And it's good chemistry between both of them.
Yeah, it certainly is the Robert Downey Jr. show,
Yeah.
But every scene that she's in, she stands up to him, and she's really good.
Yeah.
No, I loved her in it, and I love the fact that they toned down her usual glamour in movies. She's less pretty than she usually is in movies, and as a result, more attractive.
Yeah.
And it's just and it's they did a great job with her, and I think she was amazing for me in there.
Quick word about Jim Rhodes. I was disappointed, probably because in the 70s origin, his friendship with Tony Stark is really develops in a very interesting way. I mean, in the original story, Tony Stark is captured by the Viet Cong and forced to, basically build his armor and et cetera, et cetera. And but in his travels through the jungle, he ends up meeting a Marine who basically is Jim Rhodes, who's cut off from his unit, and both of them together basically make their way back to the American lines. And obviously, there's only so much time in a movie, but the type of special friendship that he has with him was sort of established from the get-go, as opposed to explored a little bit in terms of origin story. And I was kind of wishing for something along those lines. Didn't get it. I mean, that's my own particular hang-up, mind you, but I was a little underwhelmed by the character overall. He seemed very sort of,
I agree. I'm blanking on the actor's name.
Terrence Howard.
Terrence Howard. And
He looked bored.
and he did, though. Everyone else actually seemed to be enjoying themselves in the film, and he just didn't seem to have it. I don't know.
No, it's true. And even the way he does some of the scenes, and it's kind of like, wow, just doing it for a paycheck.
Well, I don't know that that's true. I agree with you guys that he wasn't not on par with the other actors, but I think those are really big shoes to fill. I don't know that he didn't feel interested, though. Well, I know that he was actually really mad and disappointed because he went public about it when he got booted off Iron Man 2.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But apparently it has a lot to do with the fact that he and Jon Favreau did not get along.
Oh, wow.
And I think at the time he was actually the highest paid actor.
I think so, yeah.
You know, which surprised me. I would have been.
Well, he just won an Oscar.
Right.
Okay, hold on. You're saying that he was paid more than
Gwyneth Paltrow and
Robert Downey Jr. for making the movie?
Yeah.
You're kidding.
But Robert
Wow.
Downey Jr., that was the role that brought him back.
Oh,
and
totally.
it is fascinating because this guy, like...
He's
I-
up
I-
and down. All that cocaine's got to do something, right?
Yeah, I know, but this is the part that, even Christian Slater, who went to jail as well,
It is in this chart.
yeah, I know, but...
So you can see, cocaine doesn't always make you charming. Going back to the movie, though, Jeff Bridges, though, I thought was really good in the movie.
Yeah, he's excellent.
I love Jeff Bridges.
It is an interesting foil for Iron Man, I think, that they chose, because what they did is essentially take somebody who's been doing the same job as Tony Stark has been doing, but is not willing to change. Like, the way the actor plays it, I think is really good, because I don't feel that it's a bad person. I think it's a person that's gone way too accustomed to his level of comfort, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I think, again, that works with this sort of analogy of, like, how can you be a responsible American and still be American, you know what I mean? And, like, I think it's a great choice of a first villain, because it's a good trope to define what Iron Man represents, as opposed to what, he stands against. You know?
And, in the hands of this villain, basically, the overseas scenes, like where, they're terrorists and it turns out that they're working in collusion, they're just tools, everyone is just something to be bought, to make an end meet, and he's a hardworking guy and he's got a bunch of things going, but, at the end of the day, he has the same facts as the Tony Stark character, but he goes a completely different direction, and, I find it really interesting.
Yeah.
In terms of choices, you're right. Just to echo what you were saying just about the final scene, I can't imagine where it would have gone except a big dust-up fight,
No, for sure.
But I agree.
The fighting itself,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm glad it wasn't something like the Incredible Hulk where, the fight just went on and on and on, and then you're like, oh my god, this is a CGI festival. But, a couple of things I was like, eh.
Yeah, no, this one was short enough, and the armor gets kind of ruined enough, so at least it comes off and you can see their faces again.
Well, that's it.
And, then you can see...
And you can see it's not necessarily like the armor, it's his determination and everything else. It's really like him changing. I like that, but that's just the fight itself.
Yeah. I want to make two quick, very quick points on... I was going to say the ending. Do I want to spoil? There's a secret that's revealed that, in the comic book goes on for years and years and years. And I was kind of surprised with the revelation at the end, which is really kind of like almost by the way. And it, in a sense, really kind of sets up the second movie in a totally different way, with that secret being out and certain people having certain kinds of knowledge. I'm speaking very cryptically here, but I thought that was kind of an interesting and smart thing. I was almost shocked when I heard it, but then I thought, oh, interesting. And I cannot go on without saying that Iron Man really made me excited for the first time about waiting for the end of the credits. It's really interesting to have that tiny little tidbit.
The Easter egg, yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
which is to actually include it in the movie, it was the talk of town, really. It's almost like that little tidbit there was almost an extra movie in itself. I personally was just delighted. And I think I saw it early enough that the word hadn't really gone out yet, but like I'm one of those people that kind of does stay through the credits, and it really was when the next Marvel movie came out, which I believe was the
Incredible
Second
Hulk.
People were like, oh my god, you gotta wait till the ending, and sure enough, there is something too, so it's almost like a setting up for future movies, which I personally was delighted in.
Before we get to the Easter egg, I do want to address the comment you made about the revelation at the end,
Yeah.
and then we'll talk about the Easter egg, I guess. I like it as well. I thought it was a really good moment. But for me, it was sort of like another confirmation of who this character is and what you can expect and why you should love this guy. He's like sort of this force of nature in his attitude. And it's sort of another sign that he will not be tied down by superhero tropes. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But in terms of bringing it up to the present, in a way, it's so impossible to have secrets now. You know what I mean? Like, you see our politicians, you know what I mean? Like, so to think that somebody in his position, could go around and actually maintain a secret identity successfully, I almost would prefer it that, they just get rid of that right away. Otherwise, he's going to be like getting up in the middle of the boardroom and dashing off into the back and changing into his costume. Like, it would have been so silly, So I like the fact that they're like, you know what, this fits his personality. But it also it gets rid of that really cumbersome piece, of like the old style superhero trope, So I liked it,
Dimitri, you wanted to talk about the Easter egg.
Oh yeah, the Easter egg. I hate that scene. I wish it wasn't in the movie at all, and I'm so happy that it's after the credits because I can consider it this sort of like it's an afterthought that I can ignore when I watch on DVD.
Is that? Do you prefer the white Nick Fury to the black Nick Fury?
I have absolutely. I don't care about the race of Nick Fury. I find the movie works better if it's all about Tony Stark, which all of the movie is, and suddenly you have this link to this universe that I don't particularly care about,
Yeah. Well, you see, this is how I sort of treat it. Like, I find that those scenes add a little something without necessarily taking away from the original movie, but I do see it as more of a setting up to the future, right? And to me, it's just an opening of a door, a little wink, a little, hey, guess what? Maybe there's something else in the works. And it was really exciting to me as a comic book fan.
No, I think you nailed it when you said it was kind of an eye to the future. I think that's definitely what it is, and whether you're gonna like that bonus scene or not depends on whether or not you like that in movies.
True.
I like my movies to be self-contained. I resent to be continued movies. Like the part 2 of a trilogy annoys the crap out of me. And it's
You did not like Empire Strikes Back? It's the best one.
Well, I didn't. I was too young to see it live.
Oh, okay.
But I imagine if I had seen it in the theaters, I would have been like, look, I sat there for 2 hours, give me a complete story, And so here you have a complete movie, and then I'm left with this aftertaste of like, no, it's not,
Well, one thing I want to say, I mentioned the Stanley,
Stanley.
you've got these comic book movies. They strive to be realistic. They're not necessarily campy, but in every one of these Marvel movies, there's the Stan Lee cameo, which I find is just a nice nod to the campiness and the cartooniness of and the one in Iron Man is, I think, my favorite.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's the best one. It
Sorry,
really is.
Remind me again. He's like, is it the one where he's surrounded by ladies in Las Vegas?
It's Hugh Hefner.
Yeah.
Oh, it's Hugh Hefner. Oh my god.
And it's just like, it's a quick, hey Hef, you're looking really great. And he just like walks by and he turns around and it's not Hugh Hefner. And it's just nicely handled. Yeah.
On that note, if you have any questions, comments, want to share with us how much you're looking forward to Iron Man 3, directed by Shane Black this time, no more Jon Favreau, you can write us at mail@idiomanic.com or post a comment on our site. We're also on Twitter. We're also on Facebook. We're also on iTunes. Until next time.